They say the night holds its breath before something terrible happens. I remember that silence, heavy and unnatural, pressing against my ears as if the world itself anticipated what was coming. The air was thick with wood smoke, sweat, and fear. My name is Solomon Williams, and I was a slave on Callaway Plantation in Georgia. But that night, I was more than a slave. I was a father standing at the threshold of a choice that would change not just my life, but the fate of everyone tied to my blood. Esther, my only daughter, stood before me. Her body bore scars the world could not ignore, burned hands, scorched clothing, and eyes that had seen horrors no soul should endure. She had lived through what most would not have survived. And in her survival, she carried a fire that frightened me as much as it inspired me. She looked at me and said, "Papa, the cabin's burning." It was Wade's cabin she spoke of. Jeremiah Wade, the master's son, her so-called husband. The man who called ownership love and murder justice. The cabin where he had taken everything from her dignity, her peace, and worst of all, her child. The boy was dead now, smothered by neglect and cruelty, buried without recognition, his short life erased as though it had never mattered. Wade thought it was over, that by sending Esther away to an asylum, he could silence her grief and shame her into madness. But instead, she had turned her pain into fire, quite literally. When I reached her that night, the glow of the flames was still fresh against the horizon. Wade's cabin was reduced to a skeleton of wood and embers. She stood by it, unflinching, as if the blaze was not destruction but baptism, her way of claiming herself again. "Papa," she whispered, her voice both fragile and fierce, "they'll come for me by dawn," and she was right. By sunrise, search parties would be scouring the land, dogs would be loosed, chains readied, punishment delivered without mercy. "Then we run," I told her. My voice trembled more than I wanted. "We need distance before the morning," but Esther shook her head, and the firmness in her burned fingers when they wrapped around mine stopped me cold. "No, Papa, not just escape." Her eyes, dark and steady, cut through me. I know about the whispers, the plans, the rebellion. Her words staggered me. We had kept the plans for Christmas night guarded like treasure. Isaiah, the man chosen to lead, had spoken of coordinated uprisings across multiple plantations. Our one chance at shaking the system from within. It was dangerous, suicidal even, but it was hope. And now my daughter spoke of it as if she'd been sitting in every meeting. "How much do you know?" I asked, my voice harsh, though I already sensed the answer. "Enough," she said. "Enough to know it will fail. They have too many guns, too many men." Her fatalism struck me harder than anger would have. For a moment, I saw not just my daughter, but every enslaved woman who had ever been told her suffering meant nothing. And yet she was not defeated. No, she was sharper, clearer, burning with a purpose. "Then what would you have me do?" I demanded. "Return you to Wade, to the asylum they planned for you. There is another way." She leaned closer, her charred hand clutching mine tighter. "Take me to them. Let me tell my story. Let me show them how Wade murdered his own child, how the master and mistress covered it up, how justice was denied until I claimed it myself. Let me be the spark that ignites their courage." Her words cracked something inside me. She wasn't asking for freedom. She was demanding something greater, a transformation of her suffering into resistance. "They'll kill you," I whispered, choking on the truth. "They've been killing me for years," she replied, her voice steady, almost serene. "First my spirit, then my child. All that remains is this body, and even that I've reclaimed by choosing how to use it." Her burned face seemed to glow in the light of the dying fire. "Don't you see, Papa? For the first time since Wade claimed me, I've made my own choice. I am finally free." Her words fell like thunder in my chest. Freedom, not the kind whispered in prayer or dreamed of in secret, but the raw kind that comes when you decide that even in chains, your will belongs to you. Esther had seized that power in the most absolute way. The horizon was already shifting, pale streaks of dawn pressing back the dark. Time was running out. Plantation justice would soon be on the move. I looked at my daughter, scarred, fierce, unbroken, and I understood. We could not wait for Christmas. We could not wait for Isaiah's signal. Esther had already struck the first blow. "I'll take you to Isaiah," I said at last, my voice low but firm. "Not to surrender, to join forces. If your story is the spark, then let the fire spread. The rebellion needn't wait, it begins now." As we stepped into the woods, the smoke of Wade's cabin curling behind us, I knew the path ahead would be carved in blood. And yet for the first time in years, I felt something stir in me that the lash had not beaten down, that the chains had not killed. The woods wrapped around us like a cloak. damp with dew and humming with the quiet pulse of night creatures that had not yet given way to morning. Esther kept close, her gait uneven from the burns that still stiffened her legs, but her willpower carried her forward. I steadied her when she stumbled, though it was clear to me she didn't want to lean on anyone, not anymore. Every step pressed us deeper into a choice that could not be undone. The plantation lay behind us, its lantern lights flickering faintly through the trees. Ahead stretched the unknown. Somewhere in those shadows, Isaiah waited. Isaiah had always been a man people trusted. Tall, broad-shouldered, and steady in his speech, he carried himself like someone born to command, even though chains had been fastened to his wrists for as long as I'd known him. The slaves on Callaway and the neighboring plantations looked to him the way. Lost men looked to the North Star, quietly, secretly, with a kind of reverence. It was Isaiah who first whispered of Christmas. He knew the Master would grant a gathering, a rare moment when enslaved families from different fields could come together. That gathering would be the shield for the real plan, to rise, to strike, to cut free from the grip of those who owned our lives. But what Esther carried now was not part of his blueprint. She was ablaze outside his careful kindling. We reached a clearing where the moon fell in silver patches across the ground. I paused to catch my breath and to study my daughter. Her face was drawn, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But there was something burning there, something that refused to dim. "Esther," I murmured, "are you sure? Isaiah won't like this. He's careful for a reason." Her answer came without hesitation. "Care hasn't saved us, Papa. Waiting hasn't saved us. My son is dead because of their care. Wade walks free because of it. And they think they can erase me too, as if I were nothing but ash to scatter." Her words were knives, sharp and unrelenting. I had no reply that could dull them. She was right. Every compromise, every delay, every bow of the head, those things had only fed the system. When at last Isaiah appeared, stepping from the brush like a shadow made flesh, I felt the weight of the moment settle on us. He looked at me first, then at Esther, his eyes narrowed. "What's this?" His voice was low but edged with authority. "She shouldn't be here. She's not a child to be hidden away," I said quickly, before Esther could flare. "She has something you need to hear." Isaiah's gaze lingered on me, then shifted to her. "Speak." And speak she did. Esther's voice did not tremble. She told of Wade's cruelty, of the child lost, of the fire she set with her own 2 hands. She spoke of the asylum, of the master's silence, of the mistress's complicity. She laid it all bare, every wound, every insult, every atrocity. By the time she finished, the clearing was no longer silent. Isaiah's breath came heavy, his jaw clenched tight. Around him, other men and women had crept closer, drawn by her words. Their eyes gleamed in the moonlight, wide and unsettled. "You risked everything," Isaiah said finally. His tone was unreadable. "I claimed everything," Esther corrected. "My story is not shame. It is proof. Proof that they will never stop until we make them stop. You plan for Christmas, but by then half of us may be in the ground. Why not now? Why not with fire still smoking behind me?" Her defiance was fire licking at the edges of Isaiah's carefully stacked tinder. He paced a step, then 2, his mind clearly at war. "Do you know what you're asking?" he said, turning sharply. "You ask me to throw away months of planning, to move before we are ready, to lead people into slaughter." "They're already slaughtering us," Esther answered, her voice like steel. "Every day we wait, they tighten the chains. My son is gone because we waited. How many more sons, daughters, mothers, fathers must vanish before you decide it is time?" The words struck the others like a drumbeat. A murmur rippled through the group. Some nodded, fists tightening. Others looked away, fear shadowing their faces. Isaiah's eyes softened, just for a moment as he looked at her. This young woman scarred but unbroken. Then he turned to me. "And you, Solomon? Do you stand with her in this?" My throat tightened. To say no would be to betray my daughter, to smother the flame she had lit. To say yes was to bind myself to the path of rebellion, with all the death it promised. "I stand with her," I said. My voice shook, but I did not falter. "If her story can stir men's hearts, then let it be the spark. I will not ask her to be silent again." Isaiah exhaled, long and slow as though releasing a weight too heavy to carry. At last he nodded. "Then so be it. If this is the fire, let it spread. We move sooner than planned." The decision cracked through the night like lightning. Around us voices rose, some in fear, some in exhilaration. Esther closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her soot-stained cheek, not from grief this time, but from vindication. In that clearing under the cold gaze of the moon, the rebellion shifted course. No longer bound to Christmas, no longer tied to waiting. The fire had already begun. We were stepping into it. Word spread faster than the dawn. By the time the first rays of light touched the fields, whispers of Esther's defiance had reached ears that had long been waiting for a reason to act. Men bent over cotton rows raised their heads with new fire in their eyes. Women at the washtub shared glances sharp enough to cut rope. Even the children sensed it. Something was stirring, something their elders had dreamed of, but never dared believe might truly come. But fire attracts eyes as quickly as it ignites courage. The master's overseer, Crenshaw, was the first to notice something was wrong. He was a mean man with a hawk's gaze, and the whip always dangling from his belt like a promise. That morning he saw it in the way the hands moved, too quick with their tasks, too quiet with their songs. He spat tobacco in the dirt and muttered, "Something's in the air." He wasn't wrong. Isaiah had gathered the trusted ones in the smokehouse, a place rank with the scent of salted meat and secrecy. I stood at his side with Esther, though many pairs of eyes flicked toward her with unease. A woman, burned and scarred, stepping into the circle of men who had always decided such things. It unsettled them. "She speaks truth," Isaiah said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "Her story has shaken us from waiting. We strike sooner." Some nodded eager, their jaws set with determination. Others shifted nervously. One man, Samuel, raised his hand. "And what of the guns? The powder? We were to wait for the shipment through the river. Without it, we're barehanded against rifles." Esther stepped forward before Isaiah could reply. Her presence drew the room tight. "You think I needed a rifle to burn Wade's house?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "You think fire asks permission? They have weapons, yes, but we have rage. Rage does not miss its mark." A ripple moved through the crowd, half awe, half fear. I saw it then. How her scars had become armor. How her suffering gave her words the weight of iron. Even Isaiah, who had carried command like a mantle, now looked at her as though she were a force he could not harness, only follow. The plan shifted in that dim smokehouse. No longer a careful strike on Christmas Eve, no longer a hidden gathering. It would be tonight, a rising like thunder, rolling plantation to plantation before the masters could choke it silent. But every plan, no matter how righteous, walks with danger at its side. Outside, Crenshaw was watching. He had followed the trail of whispers, the nervous glances, the sudden gathering of too many bodies in one place. When he pressed his ear against the wall of the smokehouse, the truth bled into him like poison. By the time the meeting broke and we spilled back into the fields, Crenshaw was already mounting his horse. His spurs clinked like warning bells. "Riders," Isaiah muttered, catching sight of him through the smokehouse door. "He'll run to the master. We've no time left." Esther's face hardened. "Then let the first blood be his." Before anyone could stop her, she was moving, her burned hands clutching the handle of an axe left near the woodpile. She moved with a limp, but her fury gave her speed. The horse had barely taken 2 strides when Esther swung. The sound of the blade sinking into flesh was wet and final. Crenshaw's scream split the morning, then choked into silence as he tumbled from his saddle. The overseer lay sprawled in the dirt, blood darkening the earth. Gasps rose from the onlookers, fear, shock, but also something else, release. Years of his cruelty ended in a single stroke. Esther dropped the axe, her chest heaving, her eyes daring anyone to call it madness. "Now," she said, her voice raw but steady, "now they will know we are no longer theirs." The line had been crossed. There was no return. Isaiah's jaw tightened as he looked down at the lifeless body. He turned to the gathered slaves, his voice booming like thunder. Then it began. "Tonight we rise." Cheers broke from throats that had only ever known silence. Fists clenched, eyes shone, hearts pounded. Even those who trembled knew there was no turning back. The overseer's blood had sealed their fate. I felt it too, that shudder of finality, that surge of something I had never tasted so sharply before. Power. For the first time the whip was not in their hands. For the first time we had struck first. As the sun climbed higher, we scattered back to our duties with the appearance of obedience, though inside we were coiled like snakes ready to strike. By nightfall, every man and woman who had stood in that smokehouse would be ready, tools sharpened, torches hidden, hearts blazing. But Esther carried herself differently. Where others wore masks of patience, she was unmasked, unflinching. She walked the rows with her head high, her scars gleaming in the light, daring anyone to look at her and not see the storm she had unleashed. I feared for her as any father would. Yet I could not deny the truth that struck me as I watched her move among our people. Esther was no longer just my daughter. She was the embodiment of every wound, every humiliation, every stolen life. She was vengeance made flesh, and the world would burn for it. The days stretched long, each hour heavy with the weight of what was coming. Outwardly the fields hummed with their usual rhythm, the slap of hoes against earth, the rustle of cotton sacks dragging behind bent backs, the barked orders of drivers. But beneath it all was a pulse, quick and secret, running through every man, woman, and child who had heard the smokehouse oath. I felt it in my own chest, the thundering of a heart that would not quiet. Tonight the world we knew would split open. I tried to steady Esther, though in truth it was she who steadied me. She moved through the quarters like a spirit, already half removed from fear. When mothers asked her if it was true, if the rising was truly coming, she answered not with promises but with a gaze that burned like scripture into their souls. "It has already begun," she told them. "The overseer lies in the dirt. His whip will never sing again. Do you not feel the earth trembling under your feet?" And they did. The air itself seemed to carry it. A hum, a vibration of something about to break. By late afternoon, Isaiah called us together again, this time in the quarters. Children were sent to play at the edge of the woods. Women gathered baskets as if for mending. Men hunched close in the shadow of the cabins. It was not a formal council, but a gathering born of necessity. The rising was no longer a dream. It was breathing down our neck. Isaiah's voice rumbled low, meant for us alone. "By midnight, we strike the big house. We take the guns first. Without them, the masters are nothing. Then we carry the fire across the neighboring fields. Each plantation will see the flames and know it is time." The plan was bold, desperate. But desperation was the soil we lived in. And Esther, standing at his side, gave it shape with her presence alone. "They will come hard," she said, her voice coarse yet steady. "They will come with dogs and chains and guns. But they will come afraid because tonight we are no longer theirs. Afraid because they cannot kill us fast enough to stop what has already been born." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. Some wept quietly, the sound of long-buried hope clawing its way free. Others clenched their hands around makeshift weapons, axes, scythes, sharpened stakes. But not everyone shared the fever. In the back, I caught sight of Samuel, his face drawn tight with doubt. His eyes darted toward the woods, as if calculating distance. He had family on another plantation, mouths he feared would starve if his own gamble failed. His fear was not cowardice, but it was dangerous all the same. Esther saw him too. She stepped toward him, her scarred face lit by the setting sun. "Do you think waiting will save you?" she asked, her voice sharp as a blade. "Do you think your children will be spared if you bow lower, work harder? They will bleed you dry until nothing is left. Better they remember you as a man who stood, not one who cowered." Her words cut him deep. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes watered. He gave no answer, but he did not flee. That was enough. As darkness fell, the plantation took on an uneasy quiet. The master's house glowed with lamplight, unaware of the storm building in its shadow. Dogs barked at nothing, restless, as if sensing the shift. The drivers grew sharp in their orders, lashing harder than usual, mistaking our taught silence for disobedience. By the time the moon rose, the quarters were alive with secret movement. Torches soaked in pine resin lay hidden beneath blankets. Iron pots were filled with oil, ready to pour fire across wood and cloth. Knives and axes were sharpened to gleaming edges. Children huddled close to their mothers, wide-eyed, sensing that this night was not like others. I sat outside my cabin, the night air cool against my skin, Esther at my side. For a moment, silence stretched between us, not heavy but profound. "Are you afraid, Papa?" she asked softly. I did not lie. "Yes, so am I," she whispered. Then her eyes lifted to the glowing windows of the big house. "But fear is no chain. Tonight, fear walks with them, not us." Her words settled in me like a second heartbeat. She was right. Fear no longer bent our backs. It straightened them. It sharpened our resolve. Isaiah's figure emerged from the shadows, tall and unyielding. He raised a hand and the crowd stilled. His voice was a low growl that carried to every ear. "It is time." Torches flared one by one, small suns in the darkness. The smell of pitch and smoke rose sharp and wide. Esther gripped my hand, her burned fingers pressing into my skin. "For him," she murmured. She meant her child. But I knew she meant for all of them, for every life ground beneath the weight of this land. We moved as one, a river of fire and fury flowing toward the big house. The night cracked open with the sound of boots pounding earth, the hiss of torches, the ragged breaths of the desperate and the brave. Ahead, the grand house loomed, proud and gleaming white in the moonlight, the symbol of everything stolen from us. Tonight it would burn. The big house rose before us like a temple to their power. Columns gleaming pale in the moonlight, windows glowing with lamplight. The wide porch stretched like a stage. For years, I had bent my back so that house might stand tall, had laid brick and timber with hands that would never be free to own them. Now, standing with torch in hand, I saw it not as a monument, but as a tomb waiting to be sealed. We approached in silence at first, the earth muffling our steps, the torches casting flickering halos across scarred faces. Isaiah walked at the front, his broad shoulders squared, a hatchet hanging from his belt. Esther was beside him, her burns visible even in the firelight. Her gaze locked on the house as though she could already see it collapsing into ash. The dogs barked first. Their sharp cries pierced the night, claws scrabbling against their chains. A moment later, a curtain shifted in one of the windows, then another. Voices stirred inside. Isaiah did not hesitate. Now he barked. The torches flew. Flames licked at the dry wood of the porch, the shutters, the carefully polished doors. Oil splashed across white columns and caught fire with a roar. Smoke poured upward, black against the pale sky. Screams broke out from within, the mistress's voice shrill, the master bellowing orders, children wailing. The house that had always towered over us was suddenly alive with panic. The front door burst open, and the master himself stumbled out, his nightshirt flapping, his face twisted with rage. A pistol gleamed in his hand. "Back to your quarters," he roared. "Baccaral." His words ended in a scream as Isaiah's hatchet spun through the air and struck his arm. The pistol clattered to the ground, the master falling to his knees, clutching the wound. Esther's voice rose above the chaos, raw and commanding. "No more. Tonight we take back what was stolen." The crowd surged forward. Some carried axes, others farm tools sharpened into weapons. They stormed the porch, dragging the master into the dirt. His shouts turned to pleas, but no one listened. Years of lashings, of stolen kin, of hunger and humiliation came crashing down on him in a storm of fists and steel. Inside, the mistress shrieked for mercy, clutching her children to her breast. Flames licked at the curtains behind her. She staggered down the steps, her fine nightgown trailing soot, but the women of the quarters blocked her path. "You called us animals," one said, her voice trembling with fury. "Tonight you'll see what beasts you've made." They dragged her back toward the flames, her children screaming as the fire swallowed the parlor. The night filled with the crackle of wood splitting, the roar of fire devouring all that had once seemed untouchable. I stood frozen for a moment, torn between horror and vindication. The big house, the symbol of everything that had ground us down, was burning before my eyes. And yet in that fire was also something terrible, the knowledge that once begun, this path could never be reversed. Esther gripped my arm, pulling me back to the present. Her face glowed with sweat and soot, her eyes shining with something that was not joy but grim certainty. "Papa," she said, her voice fierce, "don't look away, this is justice." The heat drove us back as the roof caved in with a thunderous crash. Sparks shot into the night sky like stars torn loose. Around us, men and women raised their voices, not in song, but in cries of release, the kind that rose from wounds too deep for words. Isaiah lifted his voice above the roar of the fire, to the armory. The armory, small but stocked with rifles and powder, stood at the edge of the property. With the master struck down and the overseer dead, its lock was the last barrier to true power. We moved as one, leaving the big house to its funeral pyre. Behind us, the screams dwindled, choked by smoke and flame. Ahead, freedom beckoned through iron and powder. At the armory, Isaiah swung his hatchet once more, shattering the door. The smell of oil and gunpowder rushed out to meet us. Rifles gleamed in the torchlight, row upon row. Powder kegs sat waiting like the heart of a storm. For the first time, we held weapons meant for those who had always held them against us. Hands that had known only chains now gripped rifles. Shoulders that had bent under whips, now squared with defiance. Esther lifted one, the wood pressing against her burned skin. She winced, but she did not lower it. "They cannot unmake this night," she whispered. "Even if they kill us all, they cannot take it back. The world will remember." Her words were prophecy. As the first shots rang out from neighboring fields, other slaves rising at the sight of the flames, we knew the fire had spread beyond us. It was no longer just our fight. It was a reckoning rolling across the land. I raised my rifle, the weight of it strange yet righteous in my hands, and looked at my daughter. Scars, ash, and fire framed her face. She nodded once, and together we stepped into war. Confire cracked the night like lightning, splitting the sky. The first volleys came from the fields beyond Callaway, where the sight of flames had roused others to action. It spread like thunder rolling across the hills, slaves breaking from their quarters, seizing tools, seizing courage, seizing the moment. Our rifles, freshly seized from the armory, roared in answer. Smoke bit our throats as the barrels spat fire. The plantation dogs howled, yanked against their chains, frantic with the scent of blood and fear. For a moment I thought we might drown in the chaos. Too many voices shouting, too many bodies surging, the weight of centuries pressing on a single night. But Isaiah's voice cut through it all. "Hold steady, not wild. aimed true. His command gave order to the fury. Shots rang out deliberate, measured. The few white men who rushed from neighboring farms with muskets in hand fell quickly under our fire. Their cries carried across the fields, warnings to others who thought themselves masters. And then the women came, torches blazing, their voices raised not in song but in guttural cries that sent shivers down my spine. They hurled fire into haylofts, pressed flames to wooden fences, poured oil across wagons. The night became a map of burning lines, each blaze another heartbeat of our rising. Esther moved among them like a spirit. She carried no torch of her own, but her words were fire enough. "Don't falter," she cried, her scarred face glowing in the inferno's light. "Every flame you set is a chain broken. Burn for those they buried, for those they whipped, for those they sold away." Men who had once whispered their pain in shadows now shouted their rage in the open, their rifles cracking with vengeance. Women who had bowed their heads in silence now stood tall, their torches painting the night with rebellion. Even the children, wide-eyed, carried stones and hurled them against windows, their small arms trembling with fury too young to name. But the masters were not idle. Word traveled fast, and soon the thunder of hooves pounded the earth. From the east came riders, patrollers, the night guards of slavery, armed and mounted, sworn to crush any spark of uprising before it could blaze. "Riders!" a voice shouted. We turned as one. Lanterns swung from their saddles, rifles gleamed, whips cracked. They bore down on us with the arrogance of men who had never known fear. But tonight fear was ours no longer. Isaiah raised his hand. "Stand your ground," and the first volley we fired tore through their charge. Horses screamed, rearing, throwing riders into the dirt. Men fell clutching their chests, their cries drowned in the roar of our guns. The rest pressed on, their whips lashing, their rifles firing wild. I saw one rider break through the line, his musket aimed square at Esther. My heart lurched. I shouted her name, but she did not flinch. She lifted her rifle, burned hands trembling, and fired. The shot rang true. The rider toppled backward, his body hitting the earth with a thud that seemed to shake the night itself. Esther lowered the rifle, smoke curling from its barrel, her face carved in grim resolve. She looked at me only once, and in her eyes I saw no triumph, only necessity. The battle raged, but the tide was ours. The patrollers, so long feared, scattered into the night, leaving their dead in the dirt. Their arrogance had met something fiercer than fear. When silence fell at last, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the moans of the wounded, I realized what we had done. We had faced the riders and won. Around us the plantation lay transformed. Where once stood rows of neat cabins, fires leapt high. The grand house was a collapsing skeleton of flame. The fields glowed with scattered blazes, black smoke rising into the night like a signal to the heavens. Isaiah gathered us once more, his face streaked with sweat and soot, his eyes burning with determination. "This is only the beginning," he said. "By dawn others will know. By dawn they will march to meet us or flee in terror. We cannot stop now." A cheer rose, ragged but strong, yet beneath it ran a current of exhaustion, of dread for what the next hour would bring. For every master felled, more would come. For every victory, retaliation loomed. Esther stood at Isaiah's side, her burns illuminated in the firelight, her chest heaving but her gaze unbroken. She did not speak, but her presence said what words could not. There was no turning back. I looked upon her then not only as my daughter, but as something larger, something forged from pain into steel. She was no longer simply a victim. She was a testament, a living flame that could not be doused. And as I gripped my rifle and looked out toward the horizon, where more riders would surely come, I knew the truth. If this night was to be our last, then it would be written in fire. The sky was beginning to pale, a thin gray band creeping along the horizon. Dawn was coming, and with it the weight of everything we had done. Smoke clung to the fields, drifting low and heavy, the smell of ash and blood choking the air. I stood among the others, rifle still in my hand, though my arms trembled with exhaustion. Around us, bodies lay where they had fallen. Patrollers sprawled in the dirt, overseers with their mouths frozen in final gasps, their whips slack beside them, and yet we stood alive. That in itself felt like a miracle. But Isaiah's voice cut through the quiet, a reminder that survival was not victory. "We cannot linger here," he said, his tone steady though his eyes burned with urgency. "The fires will draw more than patrollers. By midday, militias will come, and they will come with numbers greater than ours. If we stand still, we will be crushed." Some groaned in weary protest, but none argued. The truth was undeniable. For every slave that had risen, a dozen remained bound by fear, or by distance too great to bridge in a single night. But Isaiah would not let despair take root. "We move north," he declared. Through the swamps, through the woods, there are others waiting, others ready. This is not just Callaway's fight, this is a war. A murmur swept through the crowd. The word hung in the smoky air like a spark. War. Esther stepped forward then, her body wrapped in a blanket to shield her burned arms. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes fierce. "He's right," she said. "Last night we proved it. We can stand against them. We can bleed them. And if we keep moving, keep striking, they will never cage us again. They will never call us theirs again." Her words struck deeper than Isaiah's command. She was not a leader by title, yet every soul there looked upon her as though she had been anointed by the fire itself. In her scars they saw their own suffering, in her defiance their own yearning. Esther had become more than my daughter. She was the voice of all of us. The decision was made. We gathered what little we could, rifles, ammunition, food stolen from the big house before the fire took it. Some carried children upon their backs, others dragged wounded companions in makeshift litters. No one was left behind. And so we moved, slipping into the woods as the first light of dawn broke fully across the land. Behind us, Callaway's plantation smoldered, a black scar against the morning sky. Before us, the unknown. The swamp swallowed us quickly, the earth soft and treacherous beneath our feet. Cypress trees loomed like watchmen, their roots twisting from the water like gnarled fingers. Mosquitoes swarmed, and the air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. No rider could charge us here. No musket ball find us easily through the tangled brush. We moved in silence, save for the occasional cry of a child or the splash of feet through water. My mind churned with every step. What awaited us ahead? Allies, freedom, or death, swift and merciless? At midday, we paused to rest upon a patch of dry ground. The children huddled together, their eyes wide, their small hands clutching at scraps of bread. The women tended to the wounded, binding cuts with strips torn from skirts, pressing cloth against bullet grazes. Isaiah crouched beside me, his rifle across his knees. "Word will spread," he murmured. "By nightfall, every plantation within 20 miles will know what happened here." "And what then?" I asked. "Then," he said, "some will come to join us. Others will turn us in. But either way, there is no turning back. We are already free in one sense. The chains are broken. Now we must fight to keep them from being clasped again." His certainty gave me strength, though fear gnawed still at the edges of my resolve, for I knew what the whites were capable of when threatened. Retaliation would not be measured nor merciful. They would burn whole villages, hang innocents, whip those who had never raised a hand. They would try to make an example of us. But Esther, ever listening, spoke before doubt could take root. "Let them come," she said, her voice low but steady. "We've lived under their terror all our lives. What more can they take from us? Better to meet death with a rifle in our hands than chains on our wrists." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Even the children, too young to understand, seemed to draw courage from her words. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the swamp turned golden with fading light, we pressed on. The air grew cooler, the shadows longer, and then faintly we heard it, a distant horn, the call of men hunting. Isaiah froze, listening, his face darkened. "They are closer than I thought." We quickened our pace, hearts pounding, pushing deeper into the wilderness. The swamp closed around us like a living thing, shielding us even as it threatened to swallow us whole. The horn sounded again, nearer now. I clutched my rifle tighter, glancing at Esther. She met my gaze, her jaw set, her eyes unyielding. Whatever came next, she was ready. And I realized then that we all were. We were no longer slaves fleeing punishment. We were soldiers marching toward. The swamp had no mercy for the weak. Roots tangled beneath the water, tripping the weary. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds so thick they felt like smoke, biting every patch of skin. Children whimpered against their mothers' shoulders, and the wounded groaned with each step. Still we pressed forward, because behind us the horns were sounding again. Louder, closer. We were being hunted. By late afternoon, we found a patch of high ground, a rare rise above the marsh where the trees thinned enough for a faint shaft of sunlight to pierce through. The air reeked of rot, but it was dry enough to rest, dry enough to plan. Isaiah called the men together, his voice low but urgent. "They'll be upon us soon," he said. "We cannot outrun horses forever. If we scatter, they'll pick us off one by one. If we stand in the open, they'll crush us. But if we use the swamp, we might yet live." We listened in silence, every face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. His eyes swept across us, steady, fierce. "We know these waters better than they do. We've worked them, bled. We know where the mud sinks deep, where roots will take a horse down, where shadows will hide a man until it's too late. Tonight we turned the swamp against them." Esther, sitting nearby with her bandaged arms, lifted her head. Her voice carried quiet fire. "We don't run anymore. Let them ride into the dark. Let them learn fear in the place they thought only we belonged." A murmur of agreement spread, hesitant at first, then stronger. The decision was made. We would not flee blindly into the night. We would make the swamp our weapon. As the sun bled into the trees, we laid our traps. Men waded waist-deep into black water, tying reeds and vines into snares. Women coated branches with mud to hide their glint. Children gathered stones and sharpened sticks. Even the wounded helped, whispering prayers through clenched teeth as they dragged brush to block narrow paths. And Esther, she walked the lines, whispering words of her own. Not prayers to the white man's God, but something older, something raw. Her burned hands trembled as she dipped them into the water, letting mud run down her arms like paint. She marked her forehead with ash, her eyes closed, her lips moving in rhythm with the croak of frogs and the hum of insects. When she opened her eyes again, something had shifted. She looked less like a girl, and more like a spirit of the swamp itself, scarred, unyielding, ancient as the trees. Even the youngest child fell silent at the sight of her. Night fell fast in the swamp. Darkness crept between the trees, swallowing the last threads of sunlight. The horn sounded again, nearer now, followed by the splash of hooves and the harsh shouts of men. "They're coming," Isaiah murmured. His rifle gleamed in the faint starlight. "Hold steady." The first riders appeared as shadows moving through the mist. Lanterns swung from their saddles, casting dim circles of light that only deepened the darkness beyond. Their voices carried sharp with arrogance. "They can't be far," one called. "Smoke still in the air. We'll drive 'em out like rats," another laughed. "When we catch 'em, we'll make examples of the lot. Burn the men, sell the women, string up the rest." Their cruelty was meant to rattle us, but it only steeled our resolve. I crouched low in the water, my rifle braced against a cypress root, my breath held. Beside me, Esther knelt, her face streaked with mud, her eyes fixed on the riders with a calm fiercer than rage. Then it began. The first horse plunged into a hidden pit, screaming as it fell, throwing its rider headlong into the water. A snare tightened around another's leg, dragging him beneath the surface where the mud swallowed his cries. Shouts rose, frantic, as rifles cracked from the shadows. Riders toppled, their lanterns splashing into the swamp, hissing out in black water. Chaos reigned. Horses reared and thrashed, blinded by the dark. Men fired wildly, their bullets snapping through leaves, striking nothing but air. And we struck back unseen, our rifles and torches flashing in brief, deadly bursts. I saw Esther rise from the reeds, her figure painted in mud and ash, her burned hands gripping a torch. She hurled it into a thicket of brush slick with oil, and flames leapt high, casting wild shadows across the water. To the riders, she must have seemed less human than Spectre, a ghost risen from the chains they had forged. Their courage broke. Some tried to turn back, spurring their horses toward safer ground. But the swamp held them fast, roots twisting, mud clutching. One by one they fell, struggling, screaming, silenced. When the last shot faded and the swamp settled again into its chorus of frogs and insects, silence fell heavy. The water rippled with the remnants of struggle, lanterns floating like dead moons. The hunters had become the hunted, their bodies claimed by the very land they thought was theirs to master. We emerged from the shadows, weary, soaked, but unbroken. Isaiah lowered his rifle, his face grim. "This is how it will be," he said. "Strike and vanish, hit them where they cannot follow, make the land itself our ally." Esther stood beside him, her ash-streaked face glowing in the dying firelight. She did not speak, but her presence was enough. We all knew. We had crossed another line. We were no longer fugitives. We were warriors of the swamp. By the time dawn broke again, the swamp was behind us, and with it the bodies of the men who had thought themselves hunters. We carried no trophies, but we carried their fear, heavy and tangible, a weapon as sharp as any blade. Word would spread, white men whispering of slaves who turned the swamp into a graveyard, of shadows that struck from nowhere. That fear was as vital to us as food or powder. The land opened into pine woods, and the air grew clearer, though the scent of smoke still lingered from Callaway's ruins. We moved quickly, following narrow deer trails, our feet raw and blistered. Children whimpered softly, mothers hushed them with murmured songs, and the wounded pressed forward with teeth clenched against pain. At midday we halted in a clearing where sunlight dappled the ground. Isaiah gathered us once more, his face stern, his voice low. "They will send more than patrollers now," he said. "Militias will rise, whole towns will take arms. They will not see us as men, they will see us as plague, and they will try to burn us out." A murmur of unease spread through the group, but he raised a hand. "That is why we must keep moving, not running, but striking." Every plantation we pass is a chance to grow our numbers, to break chains, to turn fear into fire. Esther stepped forward, her burned arms bound in cloth, her eyes unwavering. Every step we take is a step they never expected us to make. We are not their property. We are not their shadows. We are the storm they thought could never come. Her words lit something in the group, a quiet flame of defiance. Even the weakest among us stood straighter, as though the chains that had once bowed our shoulders were crumbling to dust. We set out again, moving deeper into the woods. By evening, we came upon the first plantation since Callaway. A modest farm, its fields wide with cotton, its cabins huddled near the edge of a broad house painted white. Smoke rose lazily from its chimney, peaceful, oblivious. Isaiah crouched low, scanning the land. "There will be guards," he murmured. "They will not expect us, but we must move swift, precise. Free the people first, then strike." We crept from the trees, shadows in the fading light. The slaves in the fields saw us first. Their eyes widened, hoes pausing mid-swing. One young boy dropped his tool and darted toward us. But his mother seized him, fear etched in her face. She thought we were ghosts, or perhaps madmen fleeing the lash. Esther raised her burned hands and called out softly, "We are your own, we come to free you." The woman froze. Hope flickered across her face, fragile as glass. Then, as if something within her cracked, she let out a sob and sank to her knees. Others followed, their whispers rising like wind through tall grass. Isaiah wasted no time. He led a group to the cabins, breaking open doors, pulling men and women from their narrow bunks. Some resisted, too fearful to believe. Others embraced us with tears clutching our hands, their voices hoarse with disbelief. Then came the overseer. He burst from the main house with pistol drawn, his face twisted in fury. "Back, you devils!" he roared, firing into the air. His shot echoed, but no one scattered. Not this time. Isaiah leveled his rifle, but before he could fire, Esther stepped forward. Her voice cut the night like a blade. "No more." The overseer turned, his pistol rising toward her, but her stare held him frozen, as though the swamp itself clung to him still. I fired then, my bullet striking him square. He collapsed, his pistol clattering useless to the ground. Silence followed, broken only by the sharp breaths of those around us. Then a cheer rose, raw, fierce, triumphant. Chains were torn from wrists, tools flung aside. The freed joined our ranks, swelling our numbers. By nightfall, the plantation lay behind us, its fields empty, its house abandoned. We had grown, not just in strength but in spirit. For every overseer fallen, for every chain broken, the fire within us spread. As we marched deeper into the woods, Isaiah spoke to the group. "This is how it begins. One plantation, then another. Each fire we set, each soul we free weakens them and strengthens us. Soon they will fear the night itself." I glanced at Esther then, walking among the newly freed, her burned face calm, her eyes like embers. She was no longer simply my daughter. She had become something larger, an emblem, a living reminder of what we had endured and what we now demanded. But in the distance, I thought I heard another sound, faint like a drum beat, or perhaps the rumble of hooves. It was hard to tell. Yet deep in my bones I felt it. The storm we had unleashed was only beginning. And storms once risen are not easily stilled. Night swallowed the woods as we pressed on, our footsteps muffled by pine needles and damp earth. The newly freed walked among us, some still dazed as though unsure if they were dreaming. Mothers clutched children tight against their sides. Men carried little more than their torn shirts, and elders leaned heavily on makeshift staffs. Yet despite their weariness, every step forward felt like defiance, every breath like stolen victory. We had doubled our number in a single day, and with numbers came strength and danger. Isaiah knew it well. He walked at the front, his rifle balanced across his shoulders, his eyes sharp even in the dark. When the path grew narrow, he lifted a hand and we halted as one. His voice came low, steady. "We cannot travel as a horde. Too much noise, too easy a trail. We must break into bands, strike like fire, vanish like smoke." The idea unsettled some. To split meant to weaken, to risk separation. But Isaiah explained with the calm of a man who had thought through every step. If one band falls, the others survive. If one is cornered, the rest strike elsewhere. They cannot kill what they cannot catch. Murmurs rippled uncertain. Then Esther spoke, her burned face gleaming faintly in starlight. "They already think us shadows. Let us become shadows. Let us haunt them until they fear every rustle of the trees, every crack in the dark." Her words carried more weight than any plan. Slowly, one by one, the murmurs faded, replaced by grim nods. The decision was made. That night we divided. Isaiah took one band north, guiding the strongest fighters. I remained with Esther, leading those less able to move swiftly, the mothers, the children, the wounded. Another group, led by a man named Jacob, veered west toward the rivers. We promised to meet again, though none of us knew if such a meeting was possible. The parting was silent but heavy. Each group melted into the forest like streams breaking from a river, carrying pieces of the fire within them. Our band moved cautiously, avoiding open ground, slipping between trees and across shallow streams. Esther walked at my side, her presence steadying even in the thick dark. The children clung to her, drawn to her scarred hands as though the marks themselves carried protection. She never flinched, never faltered. She carried herself like someone who had already faced the worst the world could give, and dared it to try again. Near dawn, we stumbled upon another plantation, not vast like Callaway's, but smaller, nestled in a valley where smoke rose from a few cabins. We watched from the tree line as slaves bent low in the fields, overseers pacing with whips coiled at their sides. The grand house stood pale against the morning sky, silent, smug. Esther's voice was quiet but firm. We cannot pass them by. To leave them is to leave chains unbroken. I hesitated, knowing the risk. Our band was weary, half of us unarmed. But she was right. To walk past was to abandon hope. So we crept closer. The slaves in the field saw us first, their eyes widening. Fear flashed, then wonder. When Esther raised her hands, scarred and trembling, and whispered, "Come," something in them broke. Tools clattered to the ground. Men rose, women straightened, children lifted their heads. The overseers shouted, cracking their whips, rushing forward. But our rifles fired before their leather found flesh. Two fell instantly, their bodies crumpling into the dirt. The rest froze, startled by resistance they had never imagined. The slaves surged then, not with weapons but with raw fury. They overpowered the remaining guards, seizing whips, seizing knives from belts, turning the tools of their tormentors against them. For the first time, their cries were not of pain but of defiance. By midday, the cabins were emptied, the fields abandoned. The grand house burned, flames devouring its timbers, smoke rising as a beacon to anyone watching miles away. We did not linger. With every fire, every cry of freedom, the noose around us tightened. But our numbers swelled again. Another 40 souls joined us, their faces alight with the wild, dangerous hope that only comes when shackles fall. That night, as we gathered deep in the woods, I looked around at the crowd, men, women, children, all walking where they were never meant to walk. Their voices rose in whispers of prayer, of thanks, of determination. Some wept, some sang softly, some simply sat in silence, staring into the darkness as though afraid to blink lest the dream vanish. Esther sat apart, her gaze fixed on the embers of our fire. I knelt beside her. "You speak like a leader," I said quietly. She shook her head. "I speak like one who has nothing left to lose. They burned that out of me long ago, yet they follow you," I said. Her eyes lifted, fierce despite their weariness. "Then let them not follow me. Let them follow freedom, for I am not their master. I am only proof that chains can break." Her words settled deep within me, heavier than any rifle. She was right. This was no longer about vengeance or even escape. This was about reshaping the very soil beneath our feet. As the night stretched long, I lay awake listening to the rustle of the forest, the soft breaths of children, the crackle of fire, and I knew the war we waged was not only against the men who hunted us, but against the world that had built itself upon our backs, and we would not stop until it burned. Dawn broke gray and heavy, pressing down upon the forest as if the sky itself wished to weigh us into submission. Yet within the woods there was no surrender. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle in the underbrush felt alive with anticipation. The survivors from the previous night had settled into a rough pattern, creating small watchposts, keeping fire low, water flowing, and children out of sight. Esther moved among them like a quiet storm, checking wounds, adjusting positions, whispering instructions, but never raising her voice beyond necessity. The day stretched long and tense. Birds seemed to avoid us, and the forest held its breath. Whispers of militia movement in the distance reached us. Horse hooves striking gravel, distant shouts echoing through valleys. Isaiah returned briefly with news. Several search parties were already combing the southern roads, and the militia had received reinforcements. Yet he added, our bands were already far enough along to escape immediate capture, provided we moved with caution. Esther listened silently to his report, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Then she turned to me, her expression solemn. "Freedom is not given, Papa," she said, "and neither is safety. Every choice we make, every step we take, risks death. But every step we take is proof that we refuse to bow." I nodded. knowing her words were not only for me, but for everyone who gathered courage from her presence. That afternoon we moved again, the group splitting into smaller units as Isaiah had instructed. Each cluster carried a small cache of weapons, food, and blankets, and every move was calculated to minimize noise. Our path led us toward a wide river, dark and swollen from recent rains. The banks were steep, the current fast, and yet crossing was necessary. Some of the younger men constructed a makeshift raft from logs and rope. The women and children were helped across first, Esther herself carrying the smallest among them. I assisted where I could, but my eyes kept returning to her, burned hands gripping the child as if life itself depended upon it. And perhaps it did. By mid-afternoon, the majority had crossed. Only a few remained on the southern bank, waiting for the last of the rafts. Then the sound of shouting rose sharply. Militia patrols had spotted us. Panic threatened to unseat our careful composure, but Esther's calm presence kept us steady. "Do not flee," she commanded, her voice carrying like steel through the forest. "We do not run, we move. We act. Let them see that we are not prey." Her words galvanized us. The militia emerged from the tree line, dozens armed, confident, certain of easy victory. But we were not unarmed either. A small band of fighters stepped forward, rifles poised, firing warning shots that rang like thunder in the valley. The militia hesitated, surprise flickering across their faces. They expected slaves cowering, not organizing, not fighting. The confrontation lasted mere minutes, but in those minutes the forest became a crucible. We scattered in practiced formations, leading the militia into ambush points, where hidden fighters emerged with rifles and clubs. Several fell quickly, their bodies collapsing into underbrush while others fled, scrambling to regroup. Chaos reigned, but it was the chaos of defiance, not despair. Esther, always at the center of the action, guided the vulnerable to safety, carrying a wounded boy across the river with strength that seemed almost otherworldly. At one point, a militia soldier lunged at her, knife raised, and for a heartbeat I feared the worst. But she sidestepped, using his momentum against him, throwing him into the shallow water. He rose stunned and she moved on, unbroken, unbowed. By evening, the immediate threat had passed. The river had swallowed our trail, and the militia, frustrated and bleeding, had pulled back. Our small victories did not go unnoticed. Among the refugees, there was laughter, soft but genuine. Mothers held their children closer, fathers clasped hands, nodding in silent approval. Every life saved, every step forward, felt monumental. As night fell, we made camp on the northern bank, the river murmuring beside us. Fires were low, the embers dim, yet the spirit of the group burned bright. Around the fire, Esther spoke to those able to listen, recounting the stories of those who had fallen, the victories won, and the freedom that lay ahead. "Remember," she said, "what we do tonight shapes the days to come. Every choice matters, every act of courage is a seed. Let us plant these seeds so that someday others may walk freely on this earth." Her words, simple yet profound, settled on every heart. And in the dark, as the river flowed endlessly beside us, I realized she was right. Freedom, once glimpsed, could never be surrendered, even in the face of death. Night wrapped the riverbank in a velvet cloak, hiding us from the militia and the world beyond. Stars flickered faintly overhead, pale witnesses to our vigil. Fires burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of those gathered. Every eye reflected exhaustion, yet none showed surrender. The memory of the morning skirmish lingered like a pulse, alive, raw and dangerous. Esther sat among the group, her burned hands folded over her knees, watching the embers as though they whispered secrets only she could hear. Occasionally, she would look up, meeting my gaze, and in that instant, the weight of our shared history pressed upon us both. She had carried the unimaginable, the loss of her son, the suffering inflicted upon her, and the burden of leadership thrust upon her in the chaos of rebellion. Yet here she remained, steady as a lighthouse in the storm. Isaiah moved among the fighters, checking arms, tending minor injuries, and adjusting positions. His calm authority, honed by years of planning, kept the group organized even in these uncertain hours. He approached me quietly, leaning close to speak. "We've taken stock of supplies. We can hold here for a day, perhaps two if necessary. The river hides our movements, and the militia won't expect us to linger so close. We rest but remain vigilant." I nodded, understanding the fragile balance between caution and necessity. Too much movement could expose us, too little, and our momentum would falter. "And Esther?" I asked. Isaiah's eyes flicked toward her, a shadow passing across his face. "She will not rest fully, not while others need her guidance. But she remains capable. We have the strongest fighters with her. and she insists on overseeing the preparation of the escape routes. And so she did. Even in the darkness, she guided those who had never held a rifle, instructing them in basic defensive maneuvers, positioning the children and women where they would be safest, and marking the terrain with subtle signs to indicate paths and hazards. Her mind seemed to operate on several planes at once, calculating risks, inspiring courage, and maintaining a connection to the past that had brought us here. Hours passed, the fire dwindled to a smoldering glow, and the forest settled into a deceptive stillness. Then came the distant sound of hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. Our hearts tightened, but Esther's voice cut through the tension, calm and commanding. "Do not panic, we move only if necessary. Remain ready." The riders passed, unaware of our presence, and the group exhaled collectively. Small murmurs of relief spread like warmth. Yet Esther did not relax. She began moving quietly along the perimeter, touching shoulders, checking weapons, whispering strategies. "We must be ready," she said. "Freedom demands vigilance. Every misstep could cost lives." As the night deepened, I found a moment beside her. "Esther," I said softly, "you carry more than any human should. And yet you stand taller than anyone I have ever known." She looked at me, a faint smile playing at her lips, though her eyes carried the weight of all we had endured. "Tallness is not measured in height, Papa," she said. "It is measured in the refusal to be bent by the world, in the courage to act when all seems lost. We have survived this long not because we are strong, but because we choose to be unbroken." Her words resonated through me, echoing the same truths I had glimpsed during the first sparks of rebellion. Freedom was not simply the absence of chains. It was the assertion of self, the reclamation of humanity in a world that had denied it. And in this assertion lay both danger and power. By pre-dawn, the group was ready. Rafts had been reinforced, escape routes mapped, and watches set. Esther convened a final council with Isaiah and the senior fighters, her voice steady, issuing orders with surgical precision. "At first light," she said, "those who must flee north will do so in pairs or small groups. Those who remain will cover their retreat and delay any pursuing forces. Every life we save extends the reach of our rebellion." I watched her as she spoke, noting the quiet authority in her tone. The burned flesh on her hands did not diminish the force of her presence. If anything, it lent a terrifying beauty to her resolve. Each word she spoke carried weight, and every decision she made was deliberate. There was no hesitation, no wavering. Only the cold, unwavering clarity of someone who had seen too much to fear what might come next. As the first rays of light pierced the canopy, illuminating the river with silver streaks, we began to move. Esther led the front, checking each cluster of people before signaling them forward. I stayed close, not because she required protection, but because the bond between us demanded it. Behind us, the forest seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging the courage of those who dared defy the world that had sought to break them. In the distance, the sounds of preparation on the militia side grew louder, signaling that our window for movement was narrow. And yet we moved with purpose, a single pulse of coordinated determination. Each step a testament to survival, to resistance, to the reclamation of human dignity. For Esther, this was more than survival. This was the embodiment of all she had fought for. Proof that even in a world bent on cruelty, agency could not be taken from those determined to wield. And as we crossed the river once more, the water cold against our legs, I understood fully. The fight was far from over, but we had claimed something greater than land, greater than safety, greater than life itself. We had claimed our right to exist, to act, to be free. The river carried us northward, each stroke of the oar slicing through the cold water with purpose. Mist hung low, clinging to the banks like a ghostly shroud, concealing us from those who would hunt us. The quiet was deceptive. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves held the potential for discovery. Yet among the escapees, a sense of grim determination persisted. We were fugitives, yes, but we were also agents of a story that refused to die, and Esther's courage had lit that fire. Once we reached the safety of a secluded bend far from prying eyes, we made landfall. Those who had fled earlier regrouped, exhausted but alive. The younger men and women leaned against trees, catching breath, washing away the grime and blood of the previous days. Children clutched one another silently, their eyes wide, reflecting a mixture of fear and wonder. Esther moved among them, her burned hands gentle, brushing hair from foreheads, whispering reassurances that carried a weight only those who had endured terror could understand. "I need you all to listen," she said, her voice low but firm, commanding immediate attention. "The militia believes this plantation is secure. They do not know where we are, nor do they know where we can go. That ignorance is our shield. Use it. Every moment you hesitate increases the danger to yourself and others. Even as she spoke, my mind wandered to the events at Callaway, the burning house, the last desperate stand. The memory of the malicious assault, the chaos of gunfire and smoke, and the final clarity in Esther's eyes pressed against me like a weight. And yet that moment had not ended us. It had transformed us. We had survived because we acted, because we refused to surrender entirely, because courage had eclipsed fear. We spent the remainder of the morning moving deeper into the swamps, guided by maroon communities that had lived hidden along these waterways for generations. They welcomed us cautiously, recognizing the danger we carried in our wake, but also the promise of solidarity. With their help, we established temporary camps, small clusters of huts and lean-tos tucked among dense foliage, invisible from any distant road. Here, survival became an exercise in meticulous planning, securing food, maintaining watch, and patching wounds that refused to heal fully. Esther refused to rest completely. Even as her body screamed from exhaustion and pain, she guided the wounded, instructed the scouts, and spoke to the young fighters who had never seen freedom in action before. Her presence was a quiet affirmation that even after immense loss, one could reclaim agency. She never asked for sympathy, never admitted weakness. Instead, she modeled resilience, insisting that courage was an act, not a feeling. By nightfall, we had established a secure perimeter, and for the first time the escapees allowed themselves a moment of reflection. Fires burned low, casting amber light on faces etched with fatigue and determination. I watched Esther from a distance, noting how she moved among them, quietly assessing, offering instruction, instilling hope in those who had none left. Her silence between words was as powerful as her speech. A glance, a gesture, a nod carried meaning deeper than any sermon. Then, as if to test us, the forest itself seemed to shift. The wind carried a scent unfamiliar, a sound out of place. Scouts whispered in tense tones. We held our breath, weapons ready, hearts pounding. But the source proved innocuous. A family of deer moving through the undergrowth, a reminder that life persisted beyond the human struggle. Even in the shadows of violence, the world continued, indifferent and beautiful. Esther gathered the leaders for a council by the riverbank, her face illuminated by lantern light. We are no longer just fugitives, she began. We are a movement. Every person here carries the spark of what has begun at Callaway. That fire cannot be extinguished. Not entirely. Not by any militia. Not by any law or man who believes he can own another human being. Our task is to sustain it, to guide it, and to extend its reach as far as courage will allow. We spoke then of networks, of communication between the maroon communities and sympathetic allies farther north. Maps were drawn, routes marked, contingency plans outlined. It was painstaking work, but in it, I saw the legacy of Esther's rebellion take tangible form. Her actions, her defiance, were no longer just memory. They were instructions for survival, for resistance, for the assertion of humanity in a world built to deny it. As the night deepened, I found a quiet spot and allowed myself a moment to reflect. Freedom was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a living, breathing pursuit. The militia might reclaim plantations, burn houses, kill fighters. But the idea of autonomy, the spirit of defiance, could never be captured entirely. Esther had proven that. Through her, I understood that liberation was not always a single act, nor a single place, but the ongoing exercise of agency against a system designed to crush it. I returned to the camp and found her sitting quietly by the fire, staring into the flames as if conversing with the past and future simultaneously. I joined her, and together we watched the embers, knowing the path ahead would be perilous, that not all would survive, yet aware that each step taken in defiance of oppression mattered profoundly. Here, in the swamps of Georgia, amidst the uncertainty and danger, we had created something enduring, a network of freedom, a testament to human will, and a story that would outlive us all. The following weeks became a rhythm of careful motion, stealth, and strategy. By day, we moved through marshes and dense woods, learning the land in ways only those who must hide can understand. By night, we gathered in secluded clearings, sharing news, exchanging instructions, and reinforcing the fragile sense of community we had forged. Each step carried the weight of memory, the burned homes, the fallen friends, the militia's relentless pursuit, but also the fire of our rebellion, Esther's defiance, the proof that resistance was possible. The maroon communities became our tutors and allies. Elders taught us to navigate the rivers and swamps, to recognize the signs of approaching danger, and to procure food without leaving traces. Children who had grown up in fear learned quickly that they could move unseen, that silence was not just survival but power. Esther moved among all of us, her presence both commanding and quietly nurturing. Even with her burned hands and scarred body, she never wavered, never faltered, and never allowed despair to take hold. In her eyes, each life preserved, each escapee guided, was a victory equal to the victories we had lost. I found myself recording the events meticulously, a chronicler of resistance. Every map, every route, every encounter was catalogued, not for glory, not for recognition, but so that future generations would understand that freedom was not given, it was claimed. That rebellion, when grounded in courage and purpose, could ripple across time, sparking defiance in places far removed from the original act. Esther had taught me that one person's courage could become the catalyst for the liberation of many. Word of our presence began to filter through the hidden networks. Escapees from other plantations, hearing whispers of a safe haven, began to find their way to us. Some arrived with injuries, others with news, some with grief so raw it needed no words. Esther greeted them all with the same calm resolve, offering care, instruction, and when necessary a quiet reminder of why we fought. "Your body may bear scars," she told one young woman, "but your spirit need not bend. Do not let them steal what cannot be taken." Despite the relative safety of the swamps, danger never abated. Militia patrols swept through the region, hunting relentlessly. Our scouts returned with warnings of increased activity, making it clear that our window for consolidation was limited. Every day was a test of vigilance. Every night I wondered how many would survive to see another sunrise. Yet each risk taken was measured against a larger purpose: to maintain the network, to save lives, to preserve hope. Esther insisted that we not only hide but also plan. "Do not think of survival alone as enough," she said during one council. "We must also prepare for the day when we can strike again, not in desperation, but with strategy. Every route mapped, every ally contacted, every message sent strengthens our position. Freedom is not an instant. It is the careful, deliberate construction of possibility." As the weeks stretched into months, we established semi-permanent camps, with hidden supply caches and escape routes meticulously marked. Each camp became a node in a growing network of resistance, connected through trusted messengers who moved silently through the night. These messengers carried not only instructions but also stories, of Callaway, of Esther, of courage born from fire and blood. Each tale reinforced the moral of our struggle, that freedom demanded risk, action, and unwavering resolve. During one particularly quiet night, I found Esther seated alone by a lantern, examining a worn list of names from our initial uprising. "Every person on this list has escaped," she said softly, her voice a mixture of pride and melancholy. "And yet so many did not. We carry them with us, always. Their struggle informs ours. Their loss sharpens our purpose." I nodded, feeling the weight of her word. It was not just a story of survival. It was a ledger of courage, of sacrifice, of humanity reclaimed. In moments of reflection, I marveled at the transformation of those who had fled bondage. Men and women who once cowered at the mere sight of overseers now moved with a quiet confidence. They hunted, foraged, taught, learned, and guided. They bore the lessons of suffering like armor, their agency hard-won and luminous. And at the center of it all, Esther remained both guide and symbol, embodying the truth we had all come to understand. Freedom begins first in the mind and spirit, before it can ever be claimed in the body. As spring approached, rumors of uprisings in neighboring regions reached us. Inspired by the story of Callaway, enslaved people had begun to act, striking at plantations across Georgia and South Carolina. We maintained caution, wary of revealing our position prematurely, but the news carried hope. Resistance was contagious. Defiance had no need for formal leadership to spread. It traveled in whispers, in deeds, in acts of courage too small to erase but too significant to ignore. Esther and I spent long nights planning the next phase: how to link our camps with the new rebels, how to provide support, and how to ensure that the sacrifices made at Callaway would not be forgotten. Every detail mattered: the timing of movements, the safe houses, the hidden paths, the distribution of supplies. Every decision was a test of foresight, endurance, and moral clarity. In the quiet moments, I would watch her, this remarkable woman whose burned hands and wounded body could not diminish the force of her presence. I realized that freedom, in its truest sense, was not something granted by law or circumstance. It was something claimed, maintained, and nurtured in the face of constant opposition. And in that realization, I found hope. Not a naive hope, but the unshakable certainty that resistance, courage, and dignity could endure even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The years passed, yet the shadow of our struggle never faded. Each winter reminded us of the fragility of life and freedom. Each summer the promise of growth and new possibilities. I moved steadily among the hidden maroon communities, ensuring lines of communication remained intact, that no one wandered into the grasp of bounty hunters or militia forces unprepared. In every gesture, every journey, every whispered instruction, I carried Esther with me. She was no longer merely a memory. She had become a compass, guiding decisions, inspiring courage, and reminding all who encountered her story that defiance was never futile. The network we built was neither large nor centralized, but it was resilient. We learned to operate with minimal detection, moving people, supplies, and information across vast swathes of Georgia and South Carolina. Every escape successfully guided northward. Every camp maintained, every hidden message delivered, was a victory echoing Esther's act at Callaway. In her rebellion, she had ignited a flame, one that no militia or overseer could fully extinguish. Stories of uprisings, small and large, began circulating among the enslaved and free black populations alike. Callaway became a symbol, whispered with reverence and awe. Children who had never seen the plantations where Esther and I had suffered knew her name, not as a figure of myth, but as a living testament to courage and human dignity. These stories traveled further than we could, inspiring acts of quiet resistance and occasional bursts of open defiance. In some places, entire plantations refused to submit to overseers' cruelty, their courage drawn directly from the legacy of a mother who had refused to be broken. When the Civil War erupted, the networks we had nurtured provided crucial support to both those seeking freedom and those aiding the abolitionist cause. We guided escapees along treacherous routes to Union lines, delivering intelligence, securing safe passage, and maintaining the fragile trust that had taken years to establish. In every choice, in every risk undertaken, the lessons of Callaway were present. Freedom demanded courage, cooperation, and above all, the refusal to accept the lie that some lives were worth less than others. I never saw Esther again after that final stand at the Callaway house. Her body had been lost amidst fire and chaos, yet her spirit endured. In every brave action, in every life saved, in every network maintained against the tide of oppression, her influence was palpable. Her sacrifice had transformed despair into determination, fear into action, and suffering into purpose. She had taught me, and countless others, that the reclamation of one's humanity was the first, most profound act of freedom. By the time emancipation was declared, I had grown older, my body bearing scars from countless skirmishes, my mind heavy with memory. But the work was not over. Legal freedom did not erase the centuries of injustice, the systemic oppression, or the lingering hatred. I devoted myself to education and community building, establishing one of the first schools for formerly enslaved people in coastal Georgia, ensuring that literacy and knowledge would arm the next generation as effectively as rifles and stealth had armed us. Every lesson I taught carried the story of Esther, her courage, her sacrifice, her refusal to surrender her agency even when all else was taken. Through it all I wrote. Every detail, every escape, every act of resistance became part of a growing record, a testament to what we had endured and what we had achieved. My narrative, My Daughter's Freedom, published in 1870, was more than autobiography. It was evidence, proof that enslaved people were not passive, that rebellion was possible, and that human dignity could not be extinguished, even by the most oppressive system. Historians, activists, and descendants of those who had lived through the rebellions came to see it as a foundational account, a story to guide, inspire, and warn future generations. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realized that freedom, once tasted, leaves a permanent mark. Esther's defiance had shown me that liberty is not merely a condition imposed by law or circumstance. It is a state of mind, an unwavering belief in one's own humanity. Even in her absence, she remained present, in the courage of those she inspired, in the network she had helped build, in the unbreakable conviction that resistance, when guided by purpose and principle, could endure against any odds. I write this testimony not merely to recount suffering or loss, but to honor the courage that made resistance possible. The story of Callaway, of Esther Williams, and myself, Solomon, is a reminder that even in the darkest corners of human oppression, dignity, courage, and love endure. That freedom, though often delayed and perilous, is a birthright no system of oppression can entirely suppress, and that the acts of one determined individual can ignite movements that resonate across generations. So remember Esther. Remember her courage, her agency, her sacrifice. Let her defiance remind all who hear it that the human spirit, when claimed and nurtured, can never truly be enslaved. In her struggle, we see both the depths to which humanity can sink and the heights it can achieve. And in that story, in every whisper, in every shared memory, freedom lives.